Random House Audio presents The Lighthouse by P.D. James. Read for you by Charles Keating. Author's Note. Great Britain is fortunate in the variety and beauty of her offshore islands, but the setting for this novel, Combe Island off the coast of Cornwall, will not be found among them. The island, the deplorable events which took place there, and all the characters in the story, living or dead, are entirely fictitious, existing only in that interesting psychological phenomenon, the imagination of the crime novelist. P.D. James. Prologue. Chapter 1. Commander Adam Dalgliesh was not unused to being urgently summoned to non-scheduled meetings with unspecified people at inconvenient times, but usually with one purpose in common. He could be confident that somewhere there lay a dead body awaiting his attention. There were other urgent calls, other meetings, sometimes at the highest level. Dalgliesh, as a permanent ADC to the Commissioner, had a number of functions which, as they grew in number and importance, had become so ill-defined that most of his colleagues had given up trying to define them. But this meeting, called in Assistant Commissioner Harkness's office on the 7th floor of New Scotland Yard at 10:55 on the morning of Saturday, 23 October, had, from his first entry into the room, the unmistakable presaging of murder. This had nothing to do with a certain serious tension on the faces turned towards him. A departmental debacle would have caused greater concern. It was rather that unnatural death always provoked a peculiar unease, an uncomfortable realization that there were still some things that might not be susceptible to bureaucratic control. There were only 3 men awaiting him, and Dalgliesh was surprised to see Alexander Coniston of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. He liked Coniston, who was one of the few eccentrics remaining in an increasingly conformist and politicized service. Coniston had acquired a reputation for crisis management. This was partly founded on his belief that there was no emergency that was not amenable to precedent or departmental regulations. But, when these orthodoxies failed, he could reveal a dangerous capacity for imaginative initiatives which, by any bureaucratic logic, deserved to end in disaster, but never did. Dalgliesh, for whom few of the labyrinths of Westminster bureaucracy were wholly unfamiliar, had earlier decided that this dichotomy of character was inherited. Generations of Conistons had been soldiers. The foreign fields of Britain's imperialistic past were enriched by the bodies of unmemorialized victims of previous Coniston's crisis management. Even Coniston's eccentric appearance reflected a personal ambiguity. Alone among his colleagues, he dressed with the careful pin-striped conformity of a civil servant of the 30s, while with his strong bony face, mottled cheeks, and hair with the resilient waywardness of straw, he looked like a farmer. He was seated next to Dalgliesh, opposite one of the wide windows. Having sat through the first 10 minutes of the present meeting with an unusual economy of words, he tilted his chair a little and complacently surveyed the panorama of towers and spires, lit by a transitory, unseasonable morning sun. Of the 4 men in the room, Coniston, Adam Dalgliesh, Assistant Commissioner Harkness, and a fresh-faced boy from MI5 who had been introduced as Colin Reeves, Coniston, the one most concerned with the matter in hand, had so far said the least, while Reeves, preoccupied with the effort of remembering what was being said without the humiliating expedient of being seen to take notes, hadn't yet spoken. Now Coniston stirred himself for a summing up. "Murder would be the most embarrassing for us. Suicide hardly less so in the circumstances. Accidental death we could probably live with. Given the victim, there's bound to be publicity whichever it is, but it should be manageable, unless this is murder. Now, the problem is that we haven't much time. No date has been fixed yet, but the PM would like to arrange this top-secret international get-together in early January. A good time. Parliament not sitting, nothing much happens just after Christmas. Nothing is expected to happen. The PM seems to have set his mind on Combe. So you'll take on the case, Adam. Good." Before Dalgliesh could reply, Harkness broke in. "The security rating, if it comes off, couldn't be higher." Dalgliesh thought, "And even if you're in the know, which I doubt, you have no intention of telling me who will be meeting at this top-secret conference, or why." Security was always on a need-to-know basis. He could make his guesses, but had no particular curiosity. On the other hand, he was being asked to investigate a violent death, and there were things he needed to be told. Before Colin Reeves had time to realize that this was his cue to intervene, Coniston said, "All that will be taken care of course. We're not expecting problems. There was a similar situation some years ago, before your time, Harkness, when a VIP politician thought he'd like a respite from his protection officer and booked 2 weeks on Combe. The visitor stood the silence and solitude for 2 days before realizing that his life was meaningless without his red boxes. I should have thought that that was the message Combe was established to convey, but he didn't get it. No, I don't think we'll be worrying our friends south of the Thames." Well, that at least was a relief. To have the security services involved was always a complication. Dalgliesh reflected that the Secret Service, like the monarchy, in yielding up its mystique in response to public enthusiasm for greater openness, seemed to have lost some of that half-ecclesiastical patina of authority bestowed on those who dealt in esoteric mysteries. Today its head was known by name and pictured in the press. The previous head had actually written her autobiography, and its headquarters, an eccentric oriental-looking monument to modernity which dominated its stretch of the south bank of the Thames, seemed designed to attract rather than repel curiosity. To surrender mystique had its disadvantages. An organization came to be regarded like any other bureaucracy, staffed by the same fallible human beings and liable to the same cock-ups. But he expected no problems with the Secret Service. The fact that MI5 was represented at middle-grade level suggested that this single death on an offshore island was among the least of their present concerns. He said, "I can't go inadequately briefed. You've given me nothing except who's dead, where he died, and apparently how. Tell me about the island. Where exactly is it?" Harkness was in one of his more difficult moods, his ill-humour imperfectly concealed by self-importance and a tendency to verbosity. The large map on the table was a little crooked. Frowning, he aligned it more accurately with the edge of the table, pushed it towards Dalgliesh and stabbed it with his forefinger. "It's here. Combe Island, off the coast of Cornwall, about 20 miles southwest of Lundy Island and roughly 12 miles from the mainland. Pentworthy in this case. New Quay is the nearest large town." He looked over at Coniston. "You'd better carry on. It's more your baby than ours." Coniston spoke directly to Dalgliesh. "I'll waste a little time on the history. It explains Combe, and if you don't know it, you may start under a disadvantage. The island was owned for over 400 years by the Holcombe family, who acquired it in the 16th century, although no one seems clear exactly how. Probably a Holcombe rode out with a few armed retainers, hoisted his personal standard, and took it over. There can't have been much competition. The title was later ratified by Henry VIII once he'd got rid of the Mediterranean pirates who had established it as a base for their slave-trading raids along the Devon and Cornish coasts. After that, Combe lay more or less neglected until the 18th century, when the family began to take an interest in it and visited occasionally to look at the bird life or spend the day picnicking. Then Gerald Holcombe, born in the late 1800s, decided to use the island for family holidays. He restored the cottages and, in 1912, built a house and additional accommodation for the staff. The family went there every summer in those heady days before the First World War. The war changed everything. The two elder sons were...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?